Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar for TermWeb 4. We are going to be deep diving into staging areas, which is a development in TermWeb 4, which is built on the grid view from TermWeb 3. I see that we're still missing a couple of attendees, but we'll go ahead and start the broadcast. My name is Gustav Sjogren. I am the IT and product manager here at TermWeb Technology. I've been with the company for almost 2 years, and I'll be the one that will be leading you through staging areas in TermWeb 4. So to start off with, a quick introduction and background to staging areas. Staging areas was actually an idea that for many of you that worked in TermWeb 3 is very familiar, but back in TermWeb 3 it was called grid view. And then that term has been still used now and again in introducing staging areas in TermWeb 4. But grid view to staging areas is much like what Excel is to spreadsheets. It's just the user interface. And staging areas, much like spreadsheets, can be saved individually. The thought process behind staging areas was that we wanted to create a spreadsheet-like environment that you could, that anyone who used spreadsheets in, for example, Excel or Google spreadsheets felt familiar with the environment in TermWeb. Everyone understands spreadsheets and understands the functionality in spreadsheets, understands how you can read spreadsheets. So, and today there's still many companies that use spreadsheets for sharing and collaborating their translations. The thought process behind spreadsheets is that they're supposed to be some kind of drafting table where you can create new concepts or translate concepts without actually affecting the term base that they're connected to. In this sense, you can actually have many changes made in a staging area or the grid view in TermWeb 3 without actually affecting the term base. There were a lot of features that we wanted to include when we developed this for TermWeb 3. And that one feature was, of course, like in spreadsheets, that you want to be able to edit in bulk. You wanted to quickly be able to go through your translations, or you want to be able to change many of these fields at once. You also wanted these to be connected to the workflows. So anything that is published out of staging areas could enter our workflow or be affected by workflows. We also connected this to our revision history so that any concepts that were published, they were edited or created in staging areas. When they were published, they were part of the revision history for each term base. And this is something that we thought was is essential for being able to translate and validate in a TermWeb environment. In TermWeb 4, we've added additional features. One of the most important features is being able to have multiple staging areas available to you, both personal and collaboration, meaning that you as an administrator can share staging areas between your users. You as a normal user in TermWeb can create any number of personal staging areas where you can store your drafts for different purposes. We've also improved the UI for staging areas compared to TermWeb 3, and there are a lot less limitations when it comes to, for example, the number of terms that you can have in each staging area. In grid view, for example, you only could have 100 terms visible at once, and there's no such restriction in TermWeb 4. The key points of this presentation and this demonstration that I'll be going through is where you can find staging areas. And the point of this is to be able to show where you can edit, create, and essentially change what you need to about your staging areas. We'll also be going through how the functionality exists, what functionality exists in staging areas. This means showing the features available in the UI, such as the search functionality, how to edit both text and adding a link and files, as well as any warnings that can show up in the staging areas. And this pertains to, for example, changes made in the term base while you have drafts of a term in staging area. We'll also be showing some of the collaboration, how to share and what sharing looks like essentially, as well as how you can apply permissions and restrictions to the users who are are working in shared staging areas. To the right here, I have a small image showing how permissions work in staging areas, how you can apply permissions. So normally permissions are applied through permission schemes, locked languages, and workflows. And these can be applied individually to each user group, but you can also apply filters and views. Permissions has to, of course, do more with functionality-wise. In permission schemes, you can restrict what functionality it has to. In locked languages, you can restrict what languages they can edit. And through workflows, you can also choose to render or stylize fields in a certain way. Through filters and views on the individual user groups, you can choose to restrict the number of terms that the user has access to, as well as what fields a user can access. And all this is still applied to the staging area, just like it is in the search view. So we're going to go ahead and switch over to the TermWeb web-based UI here. And starting off now, actually, I'm going to just go ahead and log off here so you can see what I'm doing now. I'm going to actually be logging in as an administrator into TermWeb 4, which means that I have full access and permissions in TermWeb. I'm going to be able to see all fields and see all staging areas available in the client. And for the purposes of this demonstration, I actually created this separate client here. And currently this only has 2 users, and these are the 2 users I'm going to be demonstrating. The first is an administrator, which is more of a project manager role for this demonstration. And there's also a translator, and a translator, it has certain restrictions and permissions that I'm going to be demonstrating and how that looks in the TermWeb UI. So start off with, I'm actually going to show you where you can enter your staging areas in TermWeb. In TermWeb search view, you can find them by clicking on the spreadsheet-like button up here to the top right. And this will list all the personal areas available to this user. And in this case, this is the administrator that I've personally created these, as well as any other staging areas that users have created. So you as an administrator will have access to all other staging areas and see exactly what staging areas and what kind of work they're doing there. You can also find staging areas both as an administrator and as a normal user by clicking on workflows, the administration menu here, and clicking on workflows, and then clicking on staging areas. And this will list what staging areas exist for the client, as well as the number of drafts and which dictionaries they belong to. For this demonstration, I have 2 separate dictionaries just to demonstrate being able to add staging areas to different dictionaries. Now, it is worth mentioning that staging areas are dependent on their dictionary. So if you do delete a dictionary from your client, the staging areas that belong to that dictionary will also be deleted. If you click on any of these staging areas, you can open up a small menu, and this is a very simple menu, but it shows the collaboration part of staging areas, which is that you can choose which user group has access to this staging area. And this is going to be vital for this translator group that I've created. As you can see here, the visibility of this collaborative translation staging area is set to translators, which means that they should be able to see this in their staging area window up here to the right. There's also the added functionality of being able to clear staging areas here and deleting them, but this won't be of any interest to most normal users. But what we're actually going to do is we're going to go ahead and enter one of these staging areas that I've created. And this is the project manager's personal staging area. And if I click on this, this will actually change the user interface to this staging area. And this is the user interface that we call the grid view, but each staging area is their own has their own personal name, of course, and has their own drafts, concept drafts, and so on. In this case, this staging area has no concepts. So we actually need to start adding concepts to the staging area before we actually can proceed to edit or search through or do any changes to these concepts. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the search view. And there's primarily two different ways of adding terms to a staging area. The first is to select any number of terms in your term list by holding the Shift button and then clicking on terms. Now, some of you might notice that down here to the left, there's two buttons that show up when I select terms. The first one here to the left is a small plus icon. Clicking on that will show any staging areas that are connected to the dictionary and that I have access to. And if I now click on this staging area, I will actually add these concepts that I've selected to that staging area. Next to that is a button which lets me deselect all the concepts that I have selected here. So clicking on that shows that these concepts are now removed from my selection. So that is one way to add single terms to my staging area. If I click on filters and apply a filter, and now I've created a couple of filters for this user. And for this demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and choose this first filter called First 100 Concepts. This is a very simple filter that only chooses concepts in this dictionary with a concept ID less than 100. This dictionary, by the way, has about 19,000 concepts. So these are very, very small excerpt of these concepts. This will now update this term list with these 100 concepts, as well as give me this little plus icon, which I can now add all these terms that belong to this, that have been filtered now, to this staging area. If I go ahead and actually click on Project Manager Personal staging area here, you can see that there is a small icon here showing that this job has been added to my my queue, essentially. If you have several hundred concepts that are going to be added to your staging area, it's going to take a little while, and you're going to have a small queue and loading bar here that shows that these concepts are being added. You'll also get a verification that you could see down here, a green little box showing that these concepts were added to the staging area. Now, hopefully, if I click on the staging area icon here and click on Project Manager Personal, and this might take a couple of seconds, I will see all the concepts that I've added to this staging area. Do note there's a couple of things I need to go through. We have our staging area menu up here to the left. We have all our concepts, and each concept is essentially a row showing these concepts. If you have several terms belonging to the same concept, for example, there are 2 English terms belonging to this concept, you'll have an additional row within this concept. Up here to the left, we have a number of buttons. First and foremost is a small search icon. Clicking on that will open up a small search bar. And we have a little cool functionality in the staging areas that actually lets you search through multiple languages when you're searching for a specific terms. If you click on this secondary button here, you can see which languages I'm currently searching for. And these are the ones that I've actually selected to show in my staging area. You can actually add more languages that you wish to search through, but for now, English and German will suit my purposes fine. If I click on the search bar and start searching, I can apply a wildcard, for example, and this will then show me an autofill, for example, if I wish to search for a specific term. I can also get any of the terms, for example, if I apply the wildcard like I did, I can get any terms that start with the letter A and then have a wildcard. So as you can see, all these terms for both the English and the German terms are highlighted, showing all the terms that fulfilled my search criteria. I can remove the search criteria and add a secondary search criteria. In this case, for example, if I wish to search for concepts ending in T. Now it was actually a bit quicker than the staging area could update. As you can see, I have English terms that match the search criteria, and even German terms that match the criteria, even though the English ones do not. If I remove the criteria for German, I'll only have, oh, I actually did get, no, okay. Well, I did get the English terms that matched it, but they removed the German terms that were by themselves. If I remove the search criteria here, and then I can also remove the search button here. Up to the top left is a small plus icon. This is my create concept icon. And if you have the rights and permissions for that, clicking on that will add an additional row showing a new concept. This warning symbol up here shows that this is an invalid concept at the moment. And that's because it doesn't actually have a term yet. As you can see, all these terms with an asterisk are showing the required fields for these, both on the term level and the concept level. So every concept needs to have a section, for example, and every concept needs to have a term, for example. If I wish to, I can double click on any field and add a term, like so. I can also add a translation if I wish, like so. If I hover above, to the left of this term, I also get a add new term button. Clicking on that will add an additional row for terms that belong to this concept, where I can add like synonyms to this concept. Clicking on delete term will delete that term from that concept. Simple enough. Down here is a small cogwheel. Clicking on this cogwheel will show all the available concept term and languages that are available to this dictionary. Now note, this text and term dictionary that I'm working with is pretty expansive. It has a lot of different fields. You can of course customize exactly which fields you need for your term base, and then of course you only use the ones that you need in the staging area. Adding, for example, a field and then clicking on the check button here will add the abbreviation field here, and then removing it will remove it as well. I can go ahead and add text, like I mentioned, to any of these fields, but I can also, if I wish, right-click and add cross-references or attachments. You can add PDFs, sound files, pictures to any of these fields as you want. If I right-click and then click Add Attachment, I'll have actually the full file repository available to me, so that if I wish to, for example, add a picture to any concept, I can do so and then click on Done. After I click Tab, the text is highlighted, showing that this field has an added attachment to it. And hovering over it, ooh, should only see the picture as it is. I can also, of course, add, interesting. I can also add cross-references to these fields. If I, for example, highlight and right-click and add cross-reference, maybe I should have just used test as well here, cross-references. This will open a cross-reference box just like it does in the search view, where it automatically will try to search for any concepts in the dictionary that match the text that you were selecting in here. And clicking on any of these and then clicking on Done will add that as a cross-reference there to the field. You can also add external cross-references, meaning if you want to add an external link, a URL, in the same case of where you have, for example, sources that you might want to link to, you can do so here. Again, clicking on that, clicking on Done, that will add the small buttons, and now this will actually lead me to that concept if I'm clicking on it in the search view. It won't actually open that concept up here in the staging area. So we've talked a lot about the functionality here. I should also definitely mention that if I select the button here to the right of the cogwheel is the publish button. And that means essentially publishing any concepts that I'm selecting here in the staging area. The point of this is, of course, that any of these changes that you've made in the staging area are still drafts. They won't actually be applied to the term base until you publish them. So if I actually do select these terms here and then click on publish, they'll be removed from the staging area and the changes will be applied to the term-based concepts that these belong to. Or in the case of this first one here, it'll create a new concept. You might note that these have been highlighted in different ways, and that's because new concepts are given a green highlight and edited concepts are given a blue highlight. And this will actually be shown through collaborative staging areas. You'll be able to see that staging areas where other users, for example, make changes, these changes will also be shown in the same way to other users who collaborate and use the same staging area. I can also choose to delete selected drafts from a staging area by clicking on delete selected drafts. As you can see, these are the 4 that are highlighted. If I click on delete, they'll remove these 4 from the staging area, which means that none of those changes that I applied to those earlier concepts will actually have been saved. There's additionally, if you have no term selected here, you can actually click on delete all drafts from staging area, and this will actually remove all the drafts that you currently have in the staging area. Additionally, if you select a concept and click on delete concept, you get a small warning, and then this will be stylized to show that if you publish this concept, it will be deleted from the term base. And this is just a way to be able to remove terms very quickly that it might have been incorrect import or bad translations, and remove them quickly from your dictionary term base. I can also, of course, restore the concept so that it's not deleted if I publish it. Lastly, I can remove these individually from this staging area. And yeah, well, this is pretty much all most of the functionality available to me as an administrator. Again, I can see any number of languages and terms here, and I have all the information available to me. But we're interested in looking at the collaboration between two concepts. Oh, no, it's up to between 2 users. Ooh, I just realized that there's one more point that I forgot, and that is the warnings that I need to show you. So there frequently happens that a user changes a concept that is part of a staging area. And there are a number of different ways to handle that. I'm going to go ahead and change concepts that I believe are in the staging area. The first one here, common battery, for example. I'm going to add a small change to the technical note here. I'm going to call it small change 1, and then I'm going to save this change here. See that change there, and then I'm going to go ahead and choose current path, and I'm going to make a small change to this technical note as well. Now, the point of this was to show you what happens if other people are editing the terms that you currently have in your staging area, which is going to be a problem if you have a lot of users editing your terms. If you jump back into the staging area, just a couple of seconds here to load the staging area. There are 2 changes or differences between how the staging area looked at like earlier and how it looks like now. The first is there's a big warning label showing up here, showing that this grid has, this staging area has outdated concepts. And that means that this staging area has concepts that have changes made to them in the dictionary. Besides this here, we also have a small icon here to the left of these 2 concepts or terms, showing that their changes have been made. As you can see, the technical note here hasn't been actually added to this concept yet, but I can choose to update these concepts either individually by clicking on merge draft here. And this will actually show me the 2 parts information. The first one is what value the concept draft has in our staging area, which in this case there wasn't any value to the technical note before we started all this. And we can also see what change was made to the staging area. So we can actually choose to individually apply the changes that were made outside of the staging area to this concept. As you can see now, the concept has been updated with the change. Useful. In the case where we want to be able to handle all these changed concepts, I can click on the icon up here, and I'll be given one of three choices to be able to handle these updates. The first choice is to overwrite, and this will actually overwrite whatever changes I have in the staging area. I will essentially give priority to the concept, the updated concept in the term base. I can also choose keep changes, which means that I'll give priority to the concept that is in my staging area, or I can try to merge the two by using the auto figure here. If I click on OK, this will go through all the all the unupdated concepts and try to update and merge them with the new changes. And as you can see here now, this is actually reintroduced the updated concept to my staging area. So you can be working with a lot of these concepts, and in the case that someone else is working with the same concepts outside or has published changes, you can actually update the concepts in your staging area by doing so. All right. So I've gone through how to be able to edit these concepts and how you can actually update them through warnings, as well as a lot of the UI features that are available now in TermWeb 4. I'm going to go ahead and show some of the collaboration parts here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over here to what I called collaborative translations. Now, when we were in the administrative menu earlier, I did show you that this collaborative translations was a staging area that was available to our translators, which means that if our translators will have access to this. And at the moment, I've decided that my translator is going to be a German translator, because that's the translations that are missing at the moment. As you can see here, a translation has been made earlier, and if I want to, I can just, for testing purposes or just demonstrational purposes, show you how this looks when I switch over to the translator. So what I'm going to do, I made a small change to this translation here, and then I'm going to go ahead and log off. I'm going to log out of this client as the administrator, the project manager, and I'm going to log in as the translator, which I've then shared this staging area with. Now, the important part of this collaboration is that I have, as an administrator, I can apply permissions and restrictions as well as share these areas. This user, this translator, is going to have some limitations on what they're able to do in the staging area. That was actually, if you noted, the administrator had full functionality available to them, but in the case of this translator, they have a small translator personal staging area, but also the collaborative translation area that I mentioned. If I click on collaborative translations here, this will open up the UI interface for this translator. And as you can see, this newly edited term has a change, and as this change is shown to the translator. There are a couple of differences as well. You can note that there's a small locked button here showing that this language is locked for this translator, and this is part of the permission schemes application. I'm just going to go ahead and actually switch over to the translator's personal staging area to actually show additional features or restrictions that you can apply to this staging area if you so wish. In this case, we have a staging area where I have severely restricted, or a dictionary where I severely restricted the access to the translator. You can first note that there is no add concept button, for example. I can restrict the functionality for this user and this translator so that they, for example, can't create concepts or they can't edit concepts. Again, the languages here are locked. In this case here, you see that these are stylized here. And this is because this field value is hidden from this user. Again, you can apply these views to the user group so that they only have access to certain fields, and this is how they'll look. You can see that this text here is all grayed out, and that's because you as an administrator have applied, for example, read-only permissions to this field, definition field, as well as the English fields here. Again, looking farthest to the right here, I as a user still have access to, for example, adding terms to concepts, but I do not have access to them in the English concepts. If I want to, I can of course add translations and so on, but again, I can't do anything to these fields. If I double click on these fields, nothing will happen. And again, if you wish, you can restrict the viewing access to these fields. Switching back to collaborative translations, you can have any number of translators or validators working within this same staging area. And so you can have a translator working here at the same time as a validator is validating the newly translated terms, for example. Or you can have multiple translators that are working succinctly and together translating this. There's no restriction on the number of users working in the staging area at the same time. And this allows for the kind of collaboration where you can have many users or multiple translators adding these changes to the concept. The publication of this can also be restricted so that only the administrators has the ability to publish these changes when they are when you're finished and ready with the translations. In this case, I as a translator can also apply many changes to all my fields by selecting all the fields and then clicking on the bulk editing button here. This will open up a small window where I can apply a single status to all the status fields for all my translations in this case. You can of course have this part as a workflow so that a certain status is only applied after a publication by a certain user, or you can choose to have this edited as part of it. Do note, when I did this, it did not apply these status fields to these concepts because there's no German term for this concept to apply this field to. So I first actually have to add a term to these concepts to be able to apply this field change to. Since we can actually choose to share this staging area with a user group, you can add any number of users and you can actually create a individual group just for those that are working with this staging area, giving them access to this user group. You can also then apply specific permissions for their other user groups so that they're only be able to access the fields and terms that they're supposed to be able to access. And in the case of translators, they can very, very quickly add all the translations that they need to access very, very quickly. So I've gone through most of the new features available in the TermWeb 4 staging areas. In your GoToMeeting webinar group, there is actually a small question field if you want to type a question for me as a that I can actually use and answer. And I'll go ahead and see if there are any questions at the moment. Can bulk actions be reverted or undone? Well, there are two different things that you can choose. All right, so there's going to be two cases. In case you actually do the bulk changes here, I mean, this is still a drafting area, so none of these applied bulk changes are actually going to be applied right off the bat. Unfortunately, you can't actually reset or undo the single change that you can do, but you can choose to add the concepts to the staging area and work from scratch, or you can choose to empty the change that you just did. If in the case where you actually did do the bulk change and then publish them, you can, as an administrator, well, in the case of administrators, go to the dictionary history and revert the changes. The next question I have also is, what happens if two users edit the same cell at the same time? Well, the user that actually finishes editing this the cell first will have their changes applied to it first. If another user applies another change to that cell, same cell, that change will then be applied. So in the small unfortunate case where two users are having the same cell exactly at the same time, if you're sitting here and editing a single text box, for example, in this note here, and someone else has added another change to that text box, then unfortunately you won't actually see the change until after you actually leave the field. But that's a thought process to be able to, there should be some warning that should be given in that case. I've also been asked, will users be able to decide whether they want to start their session in the staging area or the search view? Currently, well, that's a good question, actually. Currently, you will always be moved into the search view if you log into TermWeb, but since every session is saved, it should be possible in the future to be able to enter the staging area immediately, but this is not available at this moment. I can definitely add it as a suggestion for at an earlier, for a future update. I also have a question. How can I edit a field more than one concept at a time? And I think I went through this through the bulk editing process or the batch editing process. Is everyone satisfied with their answer? You have to excuse me. This is the first time I'm holding in a GoToWebinar, so some of this functionality is new. How can you make bulk changes to multi-field values? Well, in this case, in this demonstration, we actually do not have multi-field value for this dictionary, but the changes are made in much the same way. There's a future update where you will be able to select one or more fields, essentially, just like you can in the search view. Is it possible to change fields with multi-valued pick lists? Yes, like I mentioned, this is a update that will be pushed shortly. This is actually on the testing server is a finished feature, so this will be pushed to the next update. Any plans to enable exporting to Excel directly from the staging area? Currently, no. There are no plans for that. Although that would be a useful feature. You can give exporting rights to any user and then you use the same filters to filter out and export, but no, currently it does not, you can't export directly from the staging area, as in download this Excel. And download an Excel file showing all these terms. Any more questions? When will the next update be? I'll have to get back to you on that because the backend decides when the update is pushed. We're looking for a stable version update, but we're close to releasing the next. I think the version was 4.0.1, and the next update 4.0.2 should be released within a couple of weeks. If anyone has any suggestions for functionality that should be added to TermWeb 4, you're free to, I can add the tasks for the ones that have been suggested here, but you're also free to mail your suggestion to support@termweb.se, and we'll take a look at that functionality-wise. Currently, we're looking at migration and making sure that our integrations that for TermWeb 3 are functioning for TermWeb 4. Would it be possible to make the command buttons in the upper left corner a bit larger? Of course. That functionality is not available to the administrator, but it's very easily done through the UI. Especially if you have your own instance of TermWeb, that should be very easy to accommodate. Are there any more questions? All right. Is there any other way to delete a concept in the staging area? I haven't seen the button for that yet. Well, you can, like I mentioned, delete concepts in the staging area here, or if you do so in the search view, you can left click on any concept and then right click on it. Oh, remember, this is a translator, so they don't actually have the permissions to delete terms. If I log out and then I log in as the administrator, which has those rights, you can delete individual concepts by right-clicking on them, and you'll have a delete concept button here. You can also, by editing a concept, and you can do so by clicking on this edit term button, or the edit concept button, or going through and the edit concept here. You can choose to delete terms individually, or delete the entire concept by clicking edit delete concept. And that will update and remove the concept from the term base. Of course, this will be saved in your revision history. So jumping over to dictionaries and then history, you can see that this concept was deleted, and I can restore it. Any more questions? Well, if there are no more questions, then I'm going to go ahead and end this webinar. I thank you everyone for joining. Thank you very much, and have a nice evening.